left to boot camp, they asked him, well, do you observe kosher? Well, he'd heard that the food in the military is pretty bad, so he said, yes, I observe kosher, which this family really didn't do. But he thought, well, the food would be better. And they said, well, if you observe kosher, then you have to go to the temple on Saturday. Okay, that's okay. So it was in boot camp that there was a man who kept asking him, are you saved? Are you saved? And in his own words, he became a pest. He's always asking him, are you saved? So he asked his rabbi at the temple, what is our Jewish response to this? He said, we went through 300 prophecies about the Messiah. We talked about them. We debated about them. Does it refer to Israel? Does it refer to the Messiah? And then he goes on to say the conclusion that he came to. He said, finally, after looking at all of these prophecies, discussing them with his rabbi, I came to the conclusion that the Messiah had to be Jesus. It couldn't be anyone else. The Messiah was from the tribe of Judah, Jesus' tribe. He was of the lineage of David, as Jesus was, born in Bethlehem. Would be wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities, pierced, beaten, spat upon, sold for 30 pieces of silver. Even the very donkey on which he rode into Jerusalem was prophesied hundreds of years before it happened. No other religious leader was like that. And he goes on, he says, there are no prophecies of any other religious leaders. Christianity was different. There were over 300 prophecies of Jesus in the Old Testament alone. This separates it from all other world religions. It had to be Jesus. And I had no choice but to believe. His birth, life, death, and resurrection were predicted hundreds of years before it happened. These prophecies and the fact of their fulfillment literally changed my soul. And so he went to different Christian denominations, eventually was baptized, immersed. And he said there was this fire in my bones. When I received baptism and I was so enthusiastic about it, I did what any good Jewish boy does. I called my mother. And so he calls his mother and he said, Mom, guess what I did tonight? What's that, honey? I was baptized. Silence. He said, what's wrong? What you just said is like driving a knife through my heart. And she said, you're no longer my son. She hung up the phone. But then he goes on to tell a very tender story, how, all this enthusiasm just, that really shocked him to hear what his mother had said. But his mother had been a smoker for many years, and she was dying of cancer. And he would go to visit her, and he would talk to her about Jesus. And he knew from the churches he had been into that the Lord did heal people still today. And so he prayed and prayed that God would heal her, but it never happened. He got angry with God. He's asking God, why don't you heal her? He said he heard God say in his heart, tell her who I am. He said, who are you? I am the God of the brokenhearted. I am the God who will hold her hand. Tell her that. So he did, and that was a consolation to her. And then the hospice where she was, it was a hospice where there were other patients as well in hospice. He would come there and he would just tell her stories from the Old Testament of Daniel and David and all of those stories, those beautiful stories in the Old Testament. And with his gift of being able to teach on these things, people would overhear this. And when they would hear him coming, they would come with their walkers and canes and wheelchairs, and just to hear him tell these stories of the Old Testament. He said to his mother, why won't you accept Jesus? And she said, in my home where I grew up, that name was used as a curse. And whenever you say that, it's like you're saying the very worst thing you could possibly say. He said, well, what if I use the Hebrew version of his name, Yeshua, which means Joshua? That would be okay. So he began to tell her the stories of Yeshua, the woman at the well, how he healed the lame like the paralytic in today's gospel, the blind, and so on. And eventually she embraced forgiveness of Christ, of Yeshua, of Jesus. She embraced the Christian faith before her death. Now in today's first reading, we have a prophecy of Isaiah. And to think about the fact that there were two great liberations for the people of Israel. So about 1,500 years before Christ, Moses leads a people from their enslavement in Egypt across the desert to the promised land.